Hello again. Today I'm going to go with the next chapter of Nehemiah. So yesterday I did chapter 12. Today I'm going to read through chapter 13 and plan to give just a little bit of commentary as I read. So I know yesterday my phone cut out, so I'll try and get through quickly so that my storage doesn't cut me off. But if not, then I'm thinking I'm just going to do a part 1, part 2. So we'll see what happens. All right, so this chapter 13, there's a little heading, says Principles of a Separation. And then verse 1, on that day, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people. And in it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever come into the assembly of God, because they had not met the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, our God turned that curse into a blessing. So it was, when they had heard the law, that they separated all the mixed multitude from Israel. And that story with Balaam, I made a note here. You can read about the Ammonite and Moabite not coming into the congregation. It's in Deuteronomy 23, 2-4. And I think Jesus also spoke about the error of Balaam, maybe, but I don't have references for that right now, so you could look that up. So it looks like they're reading the book of the law, and then now they're separating all the mixed multitude from Israel. So anybody that had been married that was looks like Moabite or Ammonite, they're now having them leave the congregation because they've just done all this work to repair this wall. And Nehemiah, if you know the story, otherwise you can go back and read. And so now they're looking at God's law and they're saying, wait a second, we need to follow this. And like I said, the reference there was Deuteronomy 23, where it talks about that, and that was verse 2-4, I think. Verse 4 here in Nehemiah, this is continuing with some more of the reforms that Nehemiah is doing. Now before this, Eliashib the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of our God, was allied with Tobiah. And he had prepared for him a large room where previously they had stored the grain offerings, the frankincense, the articles, and the tithes of grain, the new wine, and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites and singers and gatekeepers and offerings for the priests. So that was something we read yesterday in 12 about like kind of how the singers and Levites and priests were provided for. So one of those storerooms has now been handed over to Tobiah by Eliashib, and I might have said that differently just a minute ago, but Eliashib I think is how it's pronounced. But during all this, Nehemiah is saying, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Then after certain days, I obtained leave from the king. And I came to Jerusalem and discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah, and preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. So it looks like Nehemiah had left. He's now back, and he's starting to take inventory and starting to see, okay, what is everybody getting up to? And it looks like he's pretty upset about this. Because he says, and it grieved me bitterly. Therefore, I threw all the household goods of Tobiah out of the room. So he just came in and started checking stuff. Then I commanded them to cleanse the rooms, and I brought back into them the articles of the house of God, the grain offering and the frankincense. I also realized that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for each of the Levites and the singers who did the work had gone back to his field. So now, instead of them being provided so they can work in the house of God, they are now going back to provide for themselves. So they're in their fields. So I contended with the rulers. So Nehemiah is confronting the rulers now and said, "Why is the house of God forsaken?" And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain and the new wine and the oil to the storehouse. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah the priest and Zadok the scribe, and of the Levites, Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan the son of Zechar, the son of Mattaniah, for they were considered faithful, and their task was to distribute to their brethren. So now he's got some people he can trust. It looks like he's now setting up to make sure things are getting situated properly. Remember me, O God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for its services. So there's some legitimate concern from Nehemiah that all this hard work he's put into, he's praying, but he's also working really hard to make sure people are organized. He had to make this trip to Jerusalem. He had to, if you've read earlier in Nehemiah, that he's had to deal with confrontation from others that are not wanting the wall to be rebuilt. And so now he's really concerned his labor might get overturned. So that's where his fear is coming from. And there's a lot of theme in the Bible that, when you're doing the things that God requires you to do, God's blessings on it. When you're not, then, even the destruction and being carried away from the temple can happen. So this is a legitimate concern from Nehemiah, which is why he's coming in and kind of cleaning house, and that's probably where he's, the thing that's kind of upsetting him so much and angering him. In those days, he goes on to say, in those days I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And just to kind of, anybody who doesn't know, the Sabbath day was a time that Jews set aside for rest. So there's no burden carrying, no work to be done. And these people are doing all of that. So they're breaking that command. That's an old covenant command. And they're not keeping that day holy. And he goes on to say, and I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. So he also noticed men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and Jerusalem. So there's a lot of selling going on too. That's not supposed to be happening on the Sabbath, which would be Saturday. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What evil thing is this that you do, by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do thus? And did not our God bring all this disaster on us in this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath." So once again, his concern is, we've done all this to get things right with God, and now in a short amount of time, I don't know how long, because it just said he went to Artaxerxes, and now he's back, but there's already people kind of doing things they're not supposed to do, and breaking God's commands, not following God's commands. Verse 19 says, "So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut, and charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gate, so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and the sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice." So now he's now creating some physical boundaries. He's now making sure that the gates are shut. So it sounds like before this, they were not shutting the gates on the Sabbath, which let room for people to bring wares in and merchandise. and he said that merchants had lodged outside as if they were going to get in once or twice. And then verse 21, it goes on, it says, "Then I warned them and said, why do you spend a night around the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you." And I think that means he's going to bring some kind of, he's going to like arrest them or something, or take them into custody. From that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves and that they should go and guard the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. So not only are the gates now getting shut, but now the Levites have another duty. They are going to be guarding the gates. And then Nehemiah goes on, "Remembering me, O God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy." So he's concerned, He's not wanting to have a misstep with God, and there's so much out of order. And he may be feeling a little bit guilty. He had left, and now he's back. He feels responsible. At least his words are making it sound like he feels responsible. He's praying to God because he's concerned about that. There's a verse in the New Testament that says, "Be anxious for nothing. But in everything, through prayer and supplication, make your request known to God." It seems like that's what he's doing right here, because it sounds like he's a little bit anxious about what's going on here. So, verse 23, "In those days I saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke in the language of Ashdod, and could not speak in the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one of the other people." So at the beginning, too, remember it said there was a noticing of mixed multitude, and now we're finding out that they were marrying, they were giving their children, sons and daughters, and taking sons and daughters from the other people of the land. The big concern is that this was commanded not to do this. And then he goes on to clarify some more of this. So he says, "So I contended with them and cursed them, struck some of them and pulled out their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or yourselves. Did not Solomon, the king of Israel, sin by these things?" So he's reminded them of the past. Solomon had multiple wives, I think around 700, and not because the wives, there was something wrong with the wives, but it was their ideology, their beliefs, their values, essentially, that ends up pulling Solomon in his old age away from God. So he's now reminding them that. "Yet among the many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, pagan women caused even him to sin." So it doesn't matter what your status is what he's saying. Like, you have to follow what God's saying. And it seems that these people that weren't doing it weren't taking that seriously for whatever reason. Maybe they thought they didn't need to. But that's where a lot of contention comes in. What do we need to take seriously? How do we need to know that? And that's a big reason why I'm reading right now, because I want to know. I want to work through this and talk about it. And I think this is like kind of the next way to do it. I've read through the Bible quite a bit. And I think being able to read through it and being able to talk with it, it's kind of hard talking to a video, but talking with other people about it, and really looking at it and being responsible for that is a good way to know what God wants. And so it's fun anyway. This book would be considered, I think I mentioned in the last video, a historical book of the Bible. So, whether you believe in the content or not, I think it's still worth studying, because somebody believes. That would include me, and it's worth having that information, because why not? I found it fascinating, even if you were just reading it for the content. It's really interesting, but it's easy to read through and not get much out of it. You really got to want to, and I think that's the contrast we're seeing with Nehemiah and the other people. Nehemiah really, really wants to honor God, and the other people not so much. And so we're seeing that contrast in this chapter specifically of what people end up doing. And we don't see a lot of consequence right now, other than the consequence that Nehemiah is doling out, which could lead some people to say, he's taking it a little too seriously. However, over 2,500 years later, we're reading about Nehemiah and the good that he's done. And he's just asked several times, God, remember me, God, remember me. And it looks like God kind of did do that, honored that prayer. So back to this, verse 25 again. So I contended with them and cursed them, struck some of them and pulled out their hair and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or yourselves. Did not Solomon the king of Israel sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, pagan women caused even him to sin. Verse 27, should we then hear of your doing all this great evil, transgressing against our God, and marrying pagan women? And one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Eliashib, sorry, I keep saying that different ways. Hope that doesn't bother anybody. Eliashib, the high priest, was a son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I drove him from me. And so Sanballat, we read earlier, was, I didn't read yet, but it's earlier in Nehemiah that he was kind of causing trouble. So he was an enemy, and he goes into to say that in the next verse. But he drove, it looks like, Joiada, the son of Eliashib, out because of this. So Eliashib's kind of making deals and giving a storeroom to Tobiah, I think, who was an Ammonite. And now we've got, a marriage with Sanballat. And who knows, maybe this is Sanballat trying to weasel back in to cause issues. It's hard to say, but he drove him out. He drove this guy out for doing that. And then his prayer shifts and says, remember them, oh my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I cleanse them of everything pagan. So he took away everything that was in his mind displeasing to God, that didn't align with their values. And he says, I also assign duties to the priests and Levites, each to his service, and to bring in the wood offering and the first fruits at the appointed times. And he says, remember me, oh my God, for good. And I want to say, as I was saying, it looks like God honored that, that he is remembering Nehemiah, because we read about it. There's a book written. Nehemiah's book still is collected. If you don't know much about the Bible was not written as one book. It's a bunch of writings from different authors over a span of I don't know the exact math, but like for example, Nehemiah was about 2,500 years ago, and these writings go back all the way to Moses, which might be about around 4,000 years ago. Don't quote me on that. I'm still studying, still learning. So I mean, this is a long period of time that these writings are taking place, and you've got historical documents, you've got like prophets that use a lot of poetic language. So there's different genres of literacy and of literature in the Bible, and so taking a closer look at each segment, it gives you a bigger picture. It's very common for people to take one small spot from one book and just create an idea. What I do know, and some advice I do have, is that the Old Testament, especially a lot of prophecy and a lot of, the poetic language, or we call it, there's might be some symbolic language. It's important to know that as those prophecies are fulfilled, there's a lot of New Testament writers, if you know the difference between Old and New Testament, that there's a lot of New Testament writers that will kind of give clarity to some of the prophecies and things. So they'll talk about the fulfillment of them. That kind of removes some of the question. Outside of that, we don't live in that long ago. So there are some cultural things that we aren't going to understand. Specifically, we can read about, some of the laws that the Jewish people had that were given by God. But it might be difficult for us to understand because we don't live in a society that would be considered a theocracy, where God is in control, where God gets to say what happens. We live in a democracy where people get to say what happens. And so it's kind of up to individual people to study and do their best to honor God in similar ways that Nehemiah did. So it's a really good book. There's, I think, a lot to pull out from it. And I really enjoyed looking a little bit closer at it for the purpose of reading and talking about it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I plan to go on tomorrow and do the next thing here. So I look forward to seeing you then.